Great. Well, welcome everyone to session 4, Elephants and Equines. I'm your chair for this session, Michelle Szydlowski. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Exeter. I'm also an instructor at Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida, in the anthrozoology department. Last session, you heard from several of my students. I'm very, very proud of them. My research for my PhD focuses on captive elephant health and welfare in Nepal. So I have my Annapurna Range Nepal photo up behind me here for you to look at. Just a few housekeeping issues before we start. Remember to mute your mics. And when the other presentations are going on, please do turn off your camera. It seems to save the bandwidth a little bit, make our Zoom function better. Each presentation lasts about 15 minutes. It's followed by 5 minutes of Q&A if time allows. And then at the end, we'll have some extra minutes for asking more questions. So I do encourage you to type your questions in the chat box as we go along. At the end of each presentation, I'll go ahead and call out some of those questions to be answered. Anything that doesn't get answered during the sessions, we will be able to copy and paste onto the AIP platform so they can be answered later on. That'll be great. So our speakers for this session include Niam of, I'm going to try to say this university, Wageningen University in the Netherlands, Rebecca Madrid of the University of Exeter in the UK, and Hazel Facey of Harper University in the UK. So we'll get started with Niam.
Hi. So let me start with try to share my screen. So I can just start directly, right?
Yep. Go ahead. All right, we can see it.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's a bit heavy, but I think I hope it will. It's working well in your computer. So thank you for the time given to me. Today I'm going to talk about my research on elephant-based ecotourism. It's actually part of my master's program in international development studies at Wageningen University, the Netherlands. I did my fieldwork in 2019, and also I managed to finish my study at the same year. But I'm still working on it. I've been submitted the paper based on my master research report, and now it's under review of the editors. This presentation is part of the paper. If you see the title of my slide today is pretty short. It's just elephant encounters. It doesn't really sound like a research title, but I hope by doing so it will help me to explain about my research in a simpler way. What I mean by elephant encounters here is more or less about the moments and relations in which different species, in this case humans and captive elephants, are involved. And for this study, I'm going to talk about human-elephant encounters, particularly in the context of elephant-based ecotourism. At first, it's not human-elephant relation, nor elephant or nature conservation that brought me here. Instead, it was my curiosity about capitalism that encouraged me to study about the debate around capitalist mode of production. What I'm interested in when I talk about capitalism is on the process of capitalist production. For me, that was the most crucial part to be understood if we want to study about capitalism, primarily because through this subject, we can investigate the position and relation of nature within capitalism. And the most classic understanding of the relationship between nature and capitalism is that nature has to be extracted to be able to transform into commodities. It is pretty clear, for example, in the case of the production of meat that is taken from the cows, or the logs or wood from the cutting down of the trees. And there are many more examples. Well, actually, I've just mentioned some examples of the first model of capitalist production. So here in livestock animals industry, we are talking about the production of milk or meat. We are actually talking about a new product that is produced as commodities. In the case of the production of meat, we even have to kill the animals in order to get the meat. And in both cases, human labor is required in the process of production. So in short, in the first model of capitalist production, we need the mediation of human labor, and we have to create the new commodities out of nature. But we have another model of capitalist production. As we can see here, in the case of captive animals, in any ecotourism settings, there are no something new that are created, and we have to keep the animals alive. If the animals are dead, we lost their value as commodities. The fact that we have a different type of capitalist production then inspire me to ask, what is capitalist value that is produced to ecotourism? Is this related to the, in this case, related to elephant-based ecotourism? And how does ecotourism generate capitalist value? In my attempt to find the answer, I went to a small village in the island of Sumatra, in Indonesia. It's called Tangkahan. So I went back to my country and I conducted fieldwork for around 2 months in Tangkahan. Tangkahan is an ecotourism site established in the early 2000s. It is located at the buffer zone of Gunung Leuser National Park, a special place where we can still find endangered species like tigers, elephants, rhinos, and orangutans live together. Ecotourism activities in Tangkahan is run by local communities, and what makes it fascinating is that almost all of the villagers were actually illegal loggers. They used to work in the forest to cut down the trees to be sold for the middlemen in logging industry. However, all of them have now changed their occupations by making themselves engaged in ecotourism. Adjusting the identity from the destroyer to the guardian of the forests is really a big transformation, at least for conservation actors. At the moment of the fieldwork, what we can do in Tangkahan is basically experiencing nature and outdoor activities for sure, such as river tubing, hiking, and camping. The main target of their market is foreign tourists. Mostly, they came to Tangkahan because of the elephants, and in fact, Tangkahan ecotourism relies heavily on the presence of captive elephants. I will talk about the detail of the history of captive elephants in Tangkahan later on. But first, let me try to summarize the empirical findings that will be helpful for us to think about human-elephant encounters in the context of elephant-based ecotourism as a form of capitalist production. There are 3 main activities of elephant-based ecotourism, namely elephant washing, elephant tracking, and elephant grazing. The most popular one is elephant washing, and it's the cheapest one. You can join elephant washing in the morning or in the afternoon. In elephant washing session, basically you are joining elephant handlers in one of the main activities in taking care of the elephants, that is bathing. The activity is carried out in the riverbed at the fringe of the national park. You brush the body of the elephants, you can feel the grainy skin of the body of the elephants. The elephants can also spray out some waters from their trunks to your face if you want to. And in the end of the session, you take the family picture with the elephants together with their mahouts or the elephant handlers with the background of the authentic view of the tropical rainforests. So by participating in elephant washing, you can collect bodily and non-bodily experiences with the elephants. You can imagine the view of the elephant washing activity from the picture here. So that's the picture I took from Tangkahan. During the fieldwork, there are 9 captive elephants in Tangkahan, and all of them were conflict elephants. The phrase conflict elephants is used to describe the historical story of their presence in captive settings such as Tangkahan. In Indonesia, most of the captive elephants were previously those who were involved in conflicting relations with humans. They might involve in a rampage with, when they destroy agricultural plants or people's houses. In the 1980s until the early 2000s, One of the main approaches implemented by the Indonesian government in dealing with human-elephant conflicts is by capturing the elephants. The government established elephant training centers across the island in Sumatra to train the elephants. The policy of capturing wild elephants has been terminated thanks to the pressures by conservationists. So the main concern of the places like Tangkahan nowadays is taking care of the elephants. Some conservationists believe that it is impossible to introduce the elephants back to the wild. The elephants will not survive. Therefore, ecotourism provides all necessary needs required in taking care of the elephants, particularly in relation to providing financial support for their food, enclosure, and the handlers. It's part of the job of the local guides to tell the story of the elephants to tourists. By doing so, the main message to deliver is that elephant ecotourism in Tangkahan is not selling the performance of the elephants. Instead, you are participating in taking care of the elephants, in keeping them alive, not to let them die, not to let them vanish from the earth. However, it is impossible to reintroduce, since it is impossible to reintroduce the elephants to the wild, taking care of captive elephants can be translated as maintaining the elephants in captivity. The incorporation of the elephants in ecotourism enables humans to touch the elephants, which is necessary in terms of keeping them domesticated. The basic idea of the domestication of the elephant is reducing the ticklishness that might be felt by the elephants when someone touches their body. In principle, being tourism elephants is becoming controllable species for the elephants. In making sense of the empirical data I have explained, I rely on the conceptualization of encounter value in lively commodities. Bruno Haraway has introduced the term encounter value to define the entanglement of different species in capitalist production. Meanwhile, the phrase of lively commodities introduced by the geographer Rosemary Collard is inspiring for me in making sense of the new type of commodities where liveliness is the main determining feature in the commodification of living beings such as captive elephants. In elephant-based ecotourism, it is not the elephant that is sold as the commodity, but the encounters between different species. In my case of study, essentially, there are two layers of human-animal encounters. First, the encounter between the elephants and the elephant handlers based on many years of labor and during the tourism performances. And the second, the human-animal encounters that create the value in the end, the one between tourists and the elephants. It is the encounter between tourists and elephants that is the commodified product. And this is the key to be able for us to understand how value is produced. From the study of elephant-based ecotourism, I see that nature has fundamentally transformed. Not nature which can be discovered, conquered, or extracted, but the nature that is the medium through which tourism performances take place, actualized, and realized in an encounter that generates value. That's all from me, and this is my first international conference actually, and I hope I have delivered my argument in a way that is understandable. Please feel free to ask if you have some questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the chat box. I will tell you that your research aligns with a lot of the discoveries that I've made in Nepal as well. The commodification of elephant bodies for tourism is an issue globally.
I think I should stop share the screen, right?
Yep, if you just hit stop sharing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did.
There you go, perfect. Waiting for questions are a little delayed, so let's All right, so our first question is, Could you explain what the training involves, the process and training to do what? And then how much of this information is, let's see, how much of this information was gathered from Echo Encounter consumers? So two separate questions there. First off, what does the training process involve?
Well, actually, during the field work, I didn't really witness any training to the elephant because it was conducted in the previous years. So what they are doing right now is just taking care of the elephants, like feeding the elephants, bringing them to the forest for grazing, and involving in ecotourism activities for sure, because that's what I'm talking about. So there is no training anymore, but at many times you have to. It's inevitably it is inevitable that you can see how the elephant handlers treated maybe inhuman about in relation to their elephants, and it's just inevitable. So I think one of them who tell me that treating the elephants or developing bonding relationship with the elephant is it's actually an ambiguous relationship, because we have to love them, and also we have to it's a matter of, sometimes it's a matter of you or the elephant who has to die. So I think sometimes they do violence, but it's not it's not every time. I think in that case it's similar in every places in across the across Southeast Asia, and also in India and other South Asian countries.
So do you know, are you aware, do they still practice the Fajan ritual, or do they call it something else, a breaking ritual, in the area you were in, or did you not chat with them about that?
Well, there is no. You mean like a what kind of a ritual do you mean?
Like after they're captured from the wild or born in captivity, do they go through a ritualistic breaking ceremony, both physical
Well,
and mental?
well, it's not really, because so many so many influence from the let's say modern knowledge about the elephant. So I don't think they have like a. It's a very unique Indonesia, because the traditional knowledge about domestication of the elephant has gone like in 1950s, in the 1970s, because of the clearance of rainforest for palm oil and palm wood plantations. The government had no idea how to tame the elephants. That's why they asked the government of the Thailand to send the elephants and also the elephant handlers to come to the elephants and to train people, Indonesian people, how to domesticate the elephants and how to capture the elephants and this kind of stuff. So they what they did at that moment actually is it's just the modern way of treating the elephants.
Okay, great. So we'll have one more question. I'm going to kind of combine these two questions and talk about my own work as well. Is that in Nepal, during my PhD thesis, I am writing about seeing the elephant in humans as coworkers and looking at it from a co-work standpoint. And we have a couple questions here. What kind of relationship do the caretakers have with the elephants, and do they see their elephants as coworkers or as more dominated animals?
Well, I think yes, I think they do, because it's like a very typical relationship that human, or in this case, we're talking about elephant handlers, has to build with their elephants. But I think there is always particularity that you can find in different places. In my place, for example, because the elephant has to be ready every day in ecotourism activities, they have no ability to not working, or they have no freedom to choose to not working. Something that may be quite different with what the elephant handlers have or do. So in this case, every elephant handler has to understand different characteristics of each elephant, because maybe today I have to handle elephant A and tomorrow I have to handle elephant B, and that's also it's so they introduce a rolling system of handling elephants, and that's very typical, and it's very harmful for and this is also this is very harmful for the elephant handlers. maybe you have different cases in different places in Southeast Asia, for example in Nepal. And I think that's also if we want to understand about the relationship between elephant handlers and their elephants, we have to see exactly what kind of the intensity they build with the elephants, and the system that facilitate their the ability for both species to develop bonding relationship. And I think that's the most important thing. But in my case, it's pretty complex because everybody has to understand the character of every single individual elephants.
Okay, thank you. We're going to switch gears. Have Rebecca Madrid of the University of Exeter get her program up and going. And the other questions I will go ahead and put on the AIP site so that you can answer them later on. Thank you, Niam. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay. My name is Rebecca Madrid. I'm currently completing my master's in anthrozoology at the University of Exeter. I'm here to talk about my research regarding the issue of elephant unemployment in Myanmar and one potential solution for the large population of captive elephants who are currently out of work. The research is being conducted for the purposes of a module studying applied anthrozoology with the intent for the students' work to support an organization of their choosing. In late 2019, I traveled with a team of elephant veterinarians and activists to volunteer at a retirement camp in Myanmar that doubles as an ecocentric tourist attraction. Our focus was both a collaboration in the management of long-term injuries and an increase in the available enrichment opportunities for the elephant residents. During my time there, I learned a lot about the philosophy of the camp founders and its effect on the management of injured and unemployed captive elephants. So an ecocentric worldview supports the well-being of humans, non-human animals, and the natural environment. The camp in question works to embody these principles. So I'll begin by giving a brief overview of the history of elephant labor and the decline of the timber industry in Myanmar and the impacts of such high levels of unemployment, followed by a discussion of some of the suggested solutions and the issues they present. I'll discuss my intentions with the research as well as my methodology and some early patterns appearing in my preliminary data. Finally, I'll note the challenges and limitations with my work and where I aim to go from here. Okay. Myanmar is home to one of the last remaining old-growth teak forests, a fact owed in part to the use of elephants to access difficult-to-reach areas and selectively harvest the lumber rather than clear-cutting the forested area. Mahouts, known in Myanmar as Uzis, are elephant trainers and handlers that also work alongside the elephant during logging. The picture on the left shows an Uzi guiding and managing a working elephant. While this practice is sustainable relative to alternative methods, the Environmental Investigation Agency in the UK determined that despite the restrictions on exportation and the bans in logging put in place, teak harvesting actually has continued to operate at a rate higher than would be considered sustainable. In response, between 2014 and 2016, the government began to phase out annual revenue targets and subcontracting to private elephant owners. The initiatives intended to offset deforestation and ensure that any available labor went to the elephants owned by the Myanmar Timber Enterprise, the governmental body that runs the lumber operations. This allowed them to remain financially stable despite the reduction in overall teak harvesting and export. In 2016, a year-long total logging ban was implemented, followed by a 10-year teak logging ban specific to the forests of Bagoyoma. Finally, in 2017, the government implemented a substantial quota reduction due to the absence of viable trees for harvesting. So the elephants in the lumber industry have historically been granted rather progressive working conditions. Health management history of each elephant is carefully recorded in an individual book with their registration number. Training begins after maternal dependence has decreased at about age 5. From then until adulthood at age 17, light duties are maintained. After that point, healthy elephants begin traversing more difficult territory and transporting heavier loads. Despite the difficult physical labor, working days are kept short with only 3 days of work in a row, and they're not worked during the hottest months of the year while pregnant, ill, or nursing. They have a mandatory retirement age of 55, and while poor adherence to these requirements have been observed, there are also there's also evidence that this has resulted in positive health metrics for the elephants owned by the Myanmar timber industry. Um, so unemployment is a major issue due to all of the restrictions I previously mentioned. A solution is needed to replace the income generated by work in the logging industry. However, with 5,000 elephants in captivity in Myanmar and 2,700 of those in private ownership, finding work for that many animals is difficult and poses its own ethical issues about animal work and elephant work in specifically physical ways. For these individuals, though, in many cases, they've been trained for this work since their youth and as such are accustomed to physical and cognitive stimulation on a regular basis. Without that, they're showing high levels of boredom, development of stereotype movements, and negative changes in physical health. So on this slide, the table on the right shows a visual condition assessment scale, with BCS3 being the expectation for non-working elephants, but many retired elephants unfortunately fall into higher categories. Furthermore, private elephant owners who've lost their contracts are struggling to support their families, feed their elephants, and obtain necessary medical care, which can be quite costly when not provided through the MTE. It's important to recognize that the elephants are largely considered investments in many of these cases, and as such, most owners often have multiple in their care, meaning not only feeding and caring for the elephants, but paying the Uzis that work directly with them. Some suggestions for solutions for this. Many activism bodies would like to see the elephants released, but that does present challenges. In a region with high levels of deforestation and increasingly decentralized human populations, much of the territory is now prone to human-elephant conflict. The conflict is described by Desai and Riddle, including crop raiding, property destruction, human injury or death, and often the preventative or retaliatory killing of elephants. Since previously captive elephants are habituated to human presence and have relied on humans for sustenance, it's expected they'd seek out human habitats for food. In addition, elephants are extremely social. They live and roam in matriarchal herds, and if they're released, it could result in isolation. According to Conta Georgopoulos, this could affect social connections, reproduction rates, and the psychological well-being of the released animals. So the photo on this slide was actually taken during my placement at the camp. The elephant's enjoying a snack while her Uzi dust bathes her legs. Since she's 68 and has some injuries from her time logging and in performance, he's taken on some aspects of care such as this. And I found the moment where he stopped to hug her leg before standing up quite moving. Um, and demonstrative of the social bonds that exists in a lot of these Uzi elephant dyad relationships. So for the elephant to be released, there's also the potential for the separation there to be detrimental to both the human and elephant. Um, Another solution that is often, oh, there we go, often undertaken is moving those elephants into tourism and performance, which does offer a subsidy for the owners and the Uzis, either through direct employment or in the form of a lump sum payment selling the individual to someone who will use it in those industries. In either case, the elephant is still overworked, may need to be retrained, which can be abusive, and the activities also often result in injuries, repetitive strain injuries or otherwise because of how they're forced to move and the heavy demands on them. The photo on this slide is from an advertisement for October of this year, the Elephant Dancing Festival, which gives a good example of events that pose a lot of stressors, long hours, big crowds, lots of noise, and the constant demand to be performing. So my research aims, I want to use this particular camp that I worked at as a model to investigate if ecocentric camps can provide a solution that benefits both the human and elephant subjects. And so in this case, the camp is managing elderly and injured retirees, and I hope to identify factors that contribute to visitor satisfaction in ecocentric contexts. Additionally, with the scope of the project, I hope to assist the camp in their focus on community education by documenting the reasons for their practices at the site, as well as providing information they can offer to the many private owners who avail of their mobile veterinary services. And finally, in the spirit of the facility's mission, I'd like to support them in the development of a framework for camp owners and future founders seeking to adopt an ecocentric philosophy. So, due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the shifting political situation in Myanmar, I have had to readjust my project quite a bit. I intend to approach the issue in three different ways. First of all, conducting an analysis of multiple elephant camp visitor reviews posted on TripAdvisor between 2017 and 2020. My aim is to identify trends in contentment level, frequent complaints, adjective use patterns, and emotive language. This information will be used to assess visitor response to various attractions with regards to enjoyment, emotion, and connection to the elephant workers. My intent is to determine willingness to accept a general shift towards a more ecocentric and less anthropocentric elephant tourism industry. I also had hoped to conduct semi-structured interviews with the two founders of the camp at which I worked. Unfortunately, while the interviews were agreed upon and pending scheduling, the pandemic and the civil disobedience movement have kind of pushed that off. And finally, I'll offer some supplementary autoethnographic data from my experience as a visitor and volunteer at an ecocentric elephant camp. So, um, data is still preliminary at this point, and analysis is not fully complete, but based on the data pulled for tourism reviews, specifically from TripAdvisor, I noticed immediately that there's a skew in positive responses towards my case study camp and one of the three others. And these were the four available camps with reviews on TripAdvisor. I will address limitations with that going forward, but what I noticed was a lot of correlations with specifically education and learning experiences, in addition to the encounters and viewing. Care services and a philosophy rooted in the well-being of the elephants was discussed a lot, suggesting that care is a motivating factor for good tourism. A focus on social and environmental responsibility and sustainability, as well as acknowledgement of the reviewer's own role in supporting such values. All factors that were associated with the higher star reviews. So in 2009, Conta Georgopoulos outlined positive impacts of both ecocentric and anthropocentric tourism camps based on in-person surveys regarding visitor engagement at camps in Thailand, suggesting that both strategies were appropriate for handling the high number of captive elephants there. And while that's largely transferable to elephant tourism expectations in neighboring Myanmar, I do believe that the tourist review data from the last 4 years demonstrates a shift towards a more eco-friendly and positive tourism practice. And to support that, I noticed that there were a lot of themes correlated highly with negative reviews, things like restraint, control, and certain methods of elephant handling, behavioral observations such as swaying, pacing, or fidgeting that indicate the presence of stereotypies, as well as emotional words noting negative feelings perceived in the elephants as well as felt in by the reviewer. So the emotive language applied to the elephants seemed to be a tool used more frequently in negative reviews than the positive ones, which suggested to me that the perception of negative emotions prompts a stronger motivation for action than the perception of positive emotions. Um, the use of those negative emotions or emotive language more generally in the positive reviews was often to make the opposing case, to state that the elephants didn't look as sad as in other situations. And I found that immediate comparison quite interesting. So talking about limitations in the work, there was a large disparity in the number of text-based reviews at each site that I looked at between 2017 to 2020, with the highest number being 144 and the lowest being 13. Further research would be needed to determine why this is the case, looking at factors such as marketing practices, the location of the facility and its accessibility to typical tourist centers, and tour guide partnerships. because those could drastically affect where tourists are going. Additionally, there may be a cycle of bias occurring where camps with more reviews are being chosen more frequently by tourists. Perhaps of value too would be to turn to other tourism review platforms as well as TripAdvisor, because it's possible that that would present another wealth of data. Um, with regards to further research, expanding this analysis to other tourism regions with higher levels of attendance could provide valuable data to assist in changing perspectives. This would, of course, require a more selective process of data collection than in the scope of my paper, as I was able to obtain all review data in the area during my date range. To do the same process for selection in Thailand would result in a data set of an unmanageable size. Um, so while it will likely not be possible prior to the submission of my final report, I still plan to pursue the interviews with the founders of the camp at which I worked for the purpose of future research. This will hopefully include a discussion of managing the facility, the elephant care, and supporting the Uzi staff and their families when tourism is drastically reduced, as in the case of the pandemic and the civil disobedience movement. Finally, change motivation and education research should be conducted to determine possible outreach options to present the value of elephant-centric tourism to nearby facilities, still engaging in more anthropocentric practices, such as riding, tricks, and performances. So thank you. This final picture is one of my favorite girls from the camp I was at. And yeah, and any questions, let me know. And there's a reference page.
Great. If you guys want to write your questions in the chat box, here's one. To what extent are the staff at the camp open to potential changes and participation in your research despite the pandemic and the movement? So to what extent are the staff at the camp open to potential changes before and during the civil disobedience movement and the pandemic?
Okay. So the camp that I went to was actually chosen because of its receptiveness to input and change. Like I mentioned early on in the presentation, the two things we were looking at were updating some of the veterinary care practices for long-term injuries that couldn't simply be fixed, as well as enrichment improvement on site. So not only were they immediately receptive to input from volunteer groups, specifically veterinarians and activists, but they were also very excited about the opportunity to have their message and their purpose pushed out into the world. And that's really where I'm trying to situate myself, is elevating their voice in the situation as those with local knowledge and those who are trying to educate while embodying this symbiotic concept of looking at humans, non-humans, and nature.
Hey, Tom asks, would it be too harsh to say that the reviews demonstrate that humans want to participate in something that's exploitative to elephants? They don't want to be reminded that they're participating in something that's exploitative to elephants?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that's very much the shift that's happening. There's still a huge romanticization of nature and the natural, especially animals that we don't consider domesticated the way we do dogs or horses. You can't really just go out in your backyard and get an elephant if you're from certain areas. And those are typically the tourists being drawn to this type of encounter. And I think another factor that's really important is something like a ride or a performance can feel very fabricated. But witnessing medical care and feeding the elephant while she's receiving the medical care can feel more natural, more positive, more helpful. The animal's going through something as a result of something unnatural, but the tourist has the ability to kind of shirk responsibility for that. Whereas if you go and ride an elephant, you have to take responsibility for that choice directly.
Definitely. Jensen asked if you could talk a little bit about the ethnicity of the visitors to the camp. Do they see mainly international or national tourists?
With TripAdvisor, I'm looking at mostly usernames. So they don't always indicate where they're coming from. That's a little more difficult to actually pin down. But when I was present, I did notice it was predominantly white Westerners that were there. Important too is the area where the camp is located. There's a lot of tour groups that do trekking. And so the skew there may be a result of how ecotourism is marketed as having a smaller footprint and being less negatively impactful. So, like I mentioned in response to Tom's question, there's a lot of romanticization happening there and going and seeing the untouched, and it's very colonial.
Very much so, yes. So Sam, I'm going to try to interpret this question. Sam was wondering if it's useful to draw on some of the critical animal studies literature around what might happen to animals in the livestock industry if plant-based diets became mainstream. Is this a comparison we could use for the elephant tourism industry? So what might happen to elephants if non-riding facilities become the norm? I think is what he's trying to say.
Yeah, there's definitely a parallel there. I mean, I'm sure most people on this call can recognize it's a fallacy to assume if we shut down meat plants, we just release all the cows. But with the situation with the elephants, obviously my perspective and the perspective of the founders of this particular camp is not to facilitate capture and breeding to sustain this kind of tourism, but rather as a direct solution for elephants that currently don't have anywhere to be and would be at a detriment without the work, which is kind of the strange nuance that we're playing with here, because even myself personally would love for it not to be a concern, for there not to be elephants in this situation. But the reality is that there are, and release isn't a perfect solution. So something has to be found. Um, as I mentioned, it's preliminary data analysis is not complete. So I'm absolutely going to take that note. Thank you so much for suggesting that.
Okay, let's see. Probably our last question we can do. Will you ask the owners about demographics if you continue the study? So will you look at economic background of tourists and, oh, maybe economic background of the elephant keepers? She says, I would be interested in whether a lack of access to resources correlates with poor quality in husbandry.
Okay. Absolutely something worth discussing. What I do know offhand with regards to that is that the camp has a sliding scale fee and locals actually do have a reduced rate. In addition, locals who have visited more than 5 times actually have lifetime for free. So they're really trying to encourage a more positive understanding of elephants in an area where conflict is high too. So I think it would be interesting to kind of contrast the demographics, how the camp is responding to different demographics, because there's a big difference between somebody coming from North America or from Europe to see the wilderness and see the elephants, and there is from someone coming down the road who doesn't necessarily have access to watch wild elephants, and this is an opportunity to get a bit closer. So absolutely interesting. With regards to the poorer quality in husbandry, that's definitely a factor. When either contracted by or directly employed by the MTE, the elephants have access to healthcare. When they're no longer contracted, they simply don't. There's been a lot of movements lately to train local vets, and that is going well, but it's still quite costly to engage in veterinary work. So that cost translates to the consumer. And that's actually one of the initiatives at the camp is they deal with private owners who don't have access to veterinary care. And through donations and fundraising, they're able to provide free care and support them.
Wonderful, thank you. We're going to move on to Hazel next. Welcome, Hazel.
I will share my screen.
Oh, you're quite quiet, Hazel.
Is that better? Or should I get? Do I need to get some earphones or something?
That's a little better. That's a little better.
Yeah. Okay. I'll talk loud. I'll speak loud. Okay. I will share my screen with you. It's just loading. Ah, here we go. Can you see that? Is that okay?
That's great.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone, thank you for joining today. I'm Hazel. I study human-animal interaction with psychology at Hartford University, and I'm in my third year, so my final year. Today I'm going to be talking about my undergraduate dissertation, which was supervised, well, is being supervised by Dr. Michelle Whittam-Jones, and we looked at horse owner personality in relation to horse breed and horse management. So to see if there's differences between horse owner personality, and also if there's any associations there also. So just to give you a little bit of context, so we decided as to why we decided to do this particular topic. So numerous horses are relinquished annually, obviously due to a variety of different reasons, which could be through things like horse sales, loaning horses to other people, horses passing between keepers, and also horses and ponies find themselves in rescues as well. So just to give you a bit of a snapshot of the amount of horses that are sort of passed between keepers in the UK. So, so across 4 horse sales websites, correct to the 1st of February 2021, there was 5,145 horses for sale. Obviously, this doesn't include all horse sales sites and all horses passing between different ownership. And also, and if you think of that annually, that's quite a lot of horses who are going into different transferring across owners and things like that. And then if we look at so the horse itself, so horses have multiple dimensions or traits which are thought to be present, and these traits differ based on the horse's breed. So anxiousness, excitability have been reported as most interbreed variant, but dominance and protection show less variance between breeds. Of those traits, there are desirable ones, including submission, not aggressive, social to humans, and self-reliant. Now, these traits are based on horse breed may have developed due to potential human selection pressures and that changing role within human society. However, the different research uses different models of personality, so it's tricky to compare. So moving on to the context of owner personality. So Sackman and Haupt research concluded that horse owner personality requires some research. There was a 1983 study which identified horse owners as assertive and introspective, low in warmth and nurturance. However, this was quite a small sample. And again, the role of the horse has been changing. For example, there's a lot more sort of animals used for like assisted interactions as well now. So therefore it's important to look at horse owner personality, and the big 5 personality traits is currently widely accepted. And the traits include agreeableness, conscientiousness, openness to change, extroversion, and neuroticism. So rather than being sort of binary yes or no categories, it's based more sort of on a continuum to sort of allow for individual differences. So we use the Big 5 personality trait model to help make links between horse owner personality and horse breed and management. So the actual piece of research was looking at differences in horse owner personality, also looking at the associations between horse owner personality with breed and also management. So we created a questionnaire. There were 3 sections, which include demographics. We also included a section on the Big 5. So this included all 5 of those personality traits in relation to a Likert scale of a 5-point Likert scale of strongly agree to strongly disagree. And then we also had a section on the horse's characteristics, which included the horse's breed and also the management practices that those owners had with those horses. So yeah, the questionnaire was published online. There was an inclusion criteria that owners had to either own or loan a horse, had to be over 18 for safeguarding reasons, and also be based in the UK. And this questionnaire was disseminated via social media groups with either horse, equine, or any sort of related words within the title of that group. So we had a 100% questionnaire completion rate, which is fabulous, with 587 respondents, but 17 of which were outside of the inclusion criteria, so which left a sample of 570 participants. I did a retrospective margin of error calculation using a 95% confidence level, which suggested that there was a 4% margin of error, which again is great. And considering that not all horse owners are on social media, which was used for sampling, the results can be assumed fairly representative, but not necessarily representative of those who aren't on social media platforms. The median age range of participants was between 30 and 40 years, with a strong female bias, which is arguably quite representative of the equine community in the UK. And there was a difference within personality, although not necessarily significant. So the spread of the data within each personality trait was spread across strongly agree and strongly disagree. So there was no association between horse breed and any of the 5 horse owner personality characteristics. The Pearson's chi-square statistical test detected a significant association between extroversion and horse use. So we accepted our alternative hypothesis, but no other personality characteristics were associated with horse use. So the SPSS output gave a cross tabulation, which showed that horses used for ridden purposes recorded neutral extroversion the most, and participants who recorded extroversion for affiliated competition, unaffiliated competition, leisure riding and hacking, which was also similar to those horses who were retired or had other uses. Comparatively, this was different from those who owned companion horses, who mostly recorded strong disagreement with extroversion. And this is quite interesting because obviously there's a huge difference between just a companion horse and a horse that is used for ridden purposes. And then all other horse use, so all of the horse uses the results were spread across strongly agree and strongly disagree for extroversion, but for those who had companion horses, only recorded strongly disagree, and neutral. So the pie chart here shows the reported horse breeds. So as you can see, there's a huge range. So there were 49 horse breeds reported, and then we had 2 categories. One was not sure and one was other. And the most common horse breeds included the cob, the thoroughbred, the Irish sport horse, and mixed bred horses. No participants recorded owning the Casbane, the Exmoor, or the Holsteiner breeds. And the median frequency of horse sex was gelding, and the median age was between 12 and 17 years. And then in terms of the management practices, horses were stabled and turned out in varying ratios. So the median of that was 50% turn out and 50% stabled, and 87% of the horses were turned out in conspecific company, which is great because obviously there may be some reasons why horses can't be turned out together, but they are social species, so that's really great to see. And then the median frequency of the horses' diet composition was 70% forage and 30% compound feed. So the results show that horses were used for multiple purposes, but the median horse use was unaffiliated and riding club competition. So why is this research important? So the impact of frequently passing horses between keepers, potentially due to unrealistic human expectations, has negative implications for equine welfare, particularly attachment bonds. So horses are social species, and therefore they attach to conspecifics in their social group. So removing them from that can cause stress. Therefore, it's really important to understand the human-horse relationship. to ensure that positive human-horse interactions can occur to inform realistic human expectations and to ultimately enhance equine welfare. So the role of the domesticated horse within society has changed as human priorities, expectations and motivations have changed. So previously the horse has been used for warfare, transportation, farming, but now it's used more as a companion, for leisure riding, an athlete, assisted therapies, conservation grazers, education and research. So in results, no one reported owning the Casbane, the Exmoor, the Hackney or the Suffolk Punch, which suggests they might be less desirable breeds, which may be due to the role of the horse changing. So if we look at the Hackney, for example, is previously used for transportation purposes, specifically carriage driving, which is still, carriage driving is still a sport today, but it's probably not as popular, and that might be why no one reported owning the Hackney horse and pony breed. The Suffolk Punch is a draft horse previously used for farming, but maybe that they're not used so much anymore because we have machinery now for farming. And also if we have a look at so one of the breeds that was recorded least, so the Dales pony was only recorded by 5 participants, and again used to be used for farming and mining, and obviously those practices are less common in the UK today. And all of these horses are listed on the Rare Breed Survival Trust list as critical or vulnerable breeds. So horse breeds are of course important for other than human use, for example ensuring biodiversity and conserving those species also. So personality matching may help in conserving these breeds. So for example, if an owner doesn't wish to ride a horse, then maybe a Suffolk Punch is a good option. And identifying the traits for a sustainable future of horse breeds is essential really, to identify what characteristics need to be maintained or what potential ailments need to be bred out, to ensure that there is a diverse gene pool of horses and equip the horse for a sustainable future. I think particularly as well, the role of the horse may change also, so it's really important to conserve these breeds and ensure diverse gene pools. And if we let horse breeds sort of die out before we sort of look into traits and sort of matching horses and owners, then it's definitely a missed opportunity. And I think also it will sort of allow sort of breeding for purpose and hopefully reducing the amount of horses that are relinquished annually. So horse owner matching is necessary for both equine and human well-being. So if we look at dogs, for example, human personality has been matched to dog personality in dog owner dyads using the Big 5 personality traits. And dog owner personality research has shown to be is shown to affect interactions, and the life of the dog and the owner is impacted by the nature of that relationship. So it's definitely important to understand those relationships and how they can benefit each other, and identifying the outcomes to see if it is also effective in reducing the amount of horses being passed between owners, which again affects on the horse's welfare. So in terms of future recommendations, again, this piece of research has its limitations also. It's mainly quantitative, and there's definitely a need for research more internationally, because obviously the role of the horse is different internationally also, and also horse breeds are different as well. Research needs in equine personality and human horse matching, maybe creating a human horse matching model which can then be used in charities and things like that. Personality in the horse and the attachment bonds between human and horse, and definitely identifying the characteristics required to equip horses for a sustainable future of those breeds is definitely necessary. So this research, I think, is important because it can be applied to horse welfare charities. A lot of charities that put horses up for adoption look at sort of matching horse to owner or adopter. Again, hopefully decrease horses being passed between owners, and also sort of ask the question, are we really picking animals that match our images of ourselves? And can we be sort of can we sort of make sure that that horse isn't then going to be passed on because actually what we thought was going to work hasn't worked? So having some research behind that is definitely beneficial to decrease the negative impacts on equine attachment bonds and ultimately increase equine wellbeing. So yeah, here are my references, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. We have a few questions already. The first one is, was there any link between breed, personality, and their use in competition?
So I don't know how to, oh, stop sharing, sorry. So I didn't actually look at like the personality within each breed. I haven't actually finished writing up this piece yet. It's due at the end of the month, so that's a great point. But there was, so looking at extroversion, horses, owners who reported neutral for extroversion were basically those owners that had horses that were ridden, that were used for ridden purposes. So I think that's quite interesting, and definitely looking at sort of, are there particular breeds that are used for ridden, are sort of ridden? Is there sort of an association there? So definitely an area to be looked at.
Great. And then Teresa asked, she wonders if adopters will have to have personality tests before adopting particular horses from rescues.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I think it's probably quite important because, obviously rescue centres will always have that horse back, but actually for that horse's welfare, it's really important, because if it is going to go and live in a new environment and create new attachment bonds, it's just not fair to be like, actually, this is not the right horse for me, and then to sort of send it back. The impact on that horse is not good for the welfare. So definitely having some research behind the reasons why we're asking those questions, and to ensure that horses and owners or adoptees can be matched well. Yeah, just to ensure that horses aren't being sent across different parts of the country.
Martha's wondering if there would be future work which might look at specific breeds or groups of breeds and look into the personalities of the people who own them, and wonders if that might have the potential to yield similar results between owners.
Yeah, definitely. And because I think it was such a huge amount of sort of data and sort of a huge amount of different horse breeds, I think definitely sort of honing in on like specific breeds, and actually now looking, have owners of those breeds got these specific personality traits, or do they not? Why is that? What are those horses like used for? And all of those kind of questions. There's definitely more to look at.
It'd be fascinating. Well, we can open it up as well. I'm going to ask you another question in just a second, but I'm also going to tell everyone that if we can open it up now for our general questions for all three of our presenters. So Niam and Rebecca and Hazel can answer